Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Training Tidbits podcast show. I am your host, Ryan Cartledge from Animal Training Academy, and I'm extremely excited about having you here with us today and being back in your eardrums to talk all about best practice behavior management for what is set to be another amazing episode. I can't wait to dive in and learn all about today's guest and their learning odyssey. If you haven't checked the past episodes out yet, then make sure to head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and you can listen to them all there, or you can also find them on iTunes or on Stitcher. There is definitely something there for absolutely everyone, as well as some sensational up-and-coming episodes planned over the next wee bit. Just before we do get started, though, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that listens to this podcast on a regular basis, or maybe you're just joining us for the first time ever. This show is so much fun to make, and I get really inspired thinking about all the people that have benefited from all the wisdom our podcast guests have shared. Today's episode is, of course, going to be no exception to this, and if you do like today's episode, then please feel free to share it as far and as wide as you possibly can. I appreciate that a lot of you listen to the podcast on apps from your mobile devices and smartphones. And one thing that you can do that's really easy and would be really appreciated is navigate to the title of the podcast. If you tap on this, it'll open a menu, and from that menu, you'll be able to easily share it from your mobile phone. You can easily put it on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever social media network you might use. We would be extremely grateful if you could take a couple of seconds to do that. But we will get started on today's episode, where I'm going to be talking to Hilary Hankey from Avian Behavior International. Growing up with animals, Hilary's enthusiasm for animal behavior knew no bounds. After finding her grandparents' collection of National Geographic magazines, she logged the daily habits of the domestic tabby cat for research practice, including a few hours of cat naps on the family camcorder, erasing cherished family memories in the process. You could probably credit Hilary's 4 companion cockatoos for helping her ditch the plan to go to veterinary school after graduating from Colorado State University and following the less conventional path to exotic animal training. Training her birds inspired her to achieve personal goals of the endless pursuit of self-mastery and authenticity, leading Hilary to seek some of the best minds in the field from which to learn. This in turn provided incredible opportunities in zoo animal training. The founding of Avian Behavior International in 2013 is an extension of the dogged pursuit to build an environment led by integrity, a commitment to ethical standards of behavior management, and a passion for helping others achieve results with positive reinforcement. Hilary's enthusiasm for the preservation and success of birds in the wild and in our homes is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week endeavor, with commitments as various and sundry, from her consulting practice learning parrots to her position on the board of directors of the Indonesian Parrot Project. She aims to cultivate the joy of learning and sharing in order to exact change in the lives of birds around the world. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome one Hilary Hankey to the show today. Hilary, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks, Hilary. And we're going to get started and dive straight into the first question.
All
Could
right.
you please take us back to where you first learned about positive reinforcement animal training and some of the first animals you ever trained using it?
Oh gosh, my first introduction to animal training was actually with my really good friend, Dean Moser, in Colorado. I was still in college, and I found him through Yahoo groups, or maybe he found me. I can't even remember. But he was doing some really radical things with his Eclectus parrots that he was breeding at the time. And he invited me over and was just showing me how they were flying across the Colorado prairie. And he basically mentored me how to do the same thing with my sulfur-crested cockatoo. And we knew the basics of, operant conditioning and what we were doing. But I was so hungry to learn more. And from there on out, like I said, I was, supposed to go to vet school, but I just started gobbling up seminars and books and workshops about operant conditioning. And, that was back in the 90s. And there wasn't a whole bunch of that. Kids these days, they have it easy, but there really wasn't as much as you would have thought. And I was just so hungry for even more. So my first animals were my own cockatoos, and Dean even let me work with his birds. We had an arrangement after I left Colorado and moved to Wyoming where I could raise his baby eclectus, and he had Alexandrian parakeets and stuff, and I could train them, and I gained a lot of practice doing that.
So that was a big decision to drop out of vet school and follow the alternative direction. How was it going through that process? Was it quite a clear decision you made, or was it something that gradually happened over time?
Yeah, it definitely took time. I mean, before I ever even went, I guess, I just realized that it wasn't for me to interact with animals that way. But it was sort of like, well, what do I do now? Do I train animals as a hobby? Because I knew if I was, loving my birds and wanting to train them as a vet, I wouldn't have any time to do that. So do I get some other kind of job and just that would create the time and space in my life to be able to keep that up? And I know a lot of falconers in this world know that story because many of them have no way of making falconry a professional pursuit, but they just have a job that can afford them the environment and the lifestyle that they want in order to pursue this activity that just consumes your whole life. And so that's what training birds meant to me at the time. And then it actually took a couple of years before I was like, I really have to do this. And I moved out of Wyoming to California to pursue it as a profession. I couldn't just keep doing it in my spare time anymore. I had to make it a 24-hour-a-day lifestyle.
Cool. And you used the word hungry to kind of describe that. Just before we move on, what advice might you give to someone who's just getting started and is interested in pursuing a career working with animals and training?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that no one is ever done learning. And that's true for beginners up to people like me who have their own business, up to the highest of the high mentors and trainers who are out there speaking at some of these incredibly well-attended workshops and seminars and expos. So all of us are learning and working at it. None of us are perfect. And that is so important to realize because none of us are deserving of being deified. And I think that can be sort of a dangerous path to walk. Sometimes it feels really unsettling when someone meets me and gets really excited and I'm not sure that I'm the person that they think that I am or the trainer that they think that I am. And it feels a little bit unsettling because I want to make sure that I fulfill their expectations. But at the same time, I want to also pass along that everybody absolutely should still be on the path to self-mastery. And that includes taking care of yourself as well as everyone around you.
I love that. That was great. And I love hearing about people's insight and what I like to call people's behavioral odyssey. So thank you very much for sharing all of that information, Hilary. I'm really excited now, though, to talk about Avian Behavior International. When you were standing back there with Dean Moses back in your university days, did you think forward and go, I'm going to free fly birds through, and sorry if I butcher the name here, the deserts of Escondido? Have I got that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Can you tell us about how Avian Behavior International got started, what it is, and possibly share some of your favorite stories from setting it up and over the last couple of years?
Sure. Avian Behavior International began as a dream a long time ago, and it got pushed away for other safer, what seemed like more fantastic dreams. But I got sort of pushed away from my beginnings as a trainer when I started to work for these bigger organizations where I had very little ability to explore new ideas and couldn't push the boundaries as a trainer, which was exactly the way that I started. And instead it was really cool getting to work new birds and better birds and cooler birds and more exotic birds and all kinds of different animals, which should be every trainer's dream. But it just wasn't enough. I wasn't reaching the audience the way that I wanted to. And I felt like I was having to make personal sacrifices for my values and ethics. And it really challenged my beliefs. So I have grown up in a family full of entrepreneurs, and I just finally realized that it was okay to take this risk. And so I called up another trainer who I thought was also not quite risk adverse, because certainly that's what it takes. And I told him about my idea. I wanted to be more than a bird show company. I wanted to reach a different audience and explore new ideas in bird training. So our first contract to sort of get off the ground was this sort of crazy, wild artist and documentarian. And we went on some of the most insane bird training endeavors I'd ever been on. And it was kind of exactly what I needed from this very rigid zoo world, which is great. I say rigid, but it's very routine. You know exactly what you're going to be doing. You're still training new birds and new behaviors, but it's very safe. And what I was asking these birds to do now was some of the craziest, most impressive flights, and we had no script, absolutely no idea how to even prepare them. So we just basically had to prepare them to be ready for anything. And we went first to Lake Powell, which is kind of this huge dammed up reservoir, kind of in the area where you might expect there to be like the Grand Canyon. So there's these huge canyons and arches and gorgeous views, and it makes for some interesting bird training and bird flying. And all the birds were sensational. We were living on houseboats and getting the birds to the site on speedboats and stuff. And like I said, we had to have them ready for anything, and ready they were. They were absolutely stupendous. I couldn't have been more impressed with them. And from Lake Powell, we went to the Amazon, which was another absolutely amazing trip. And I wouldn't trade a single second of it for the world, even when I got deathly ill. But again, no idea what exactly the birds were going to have to be ready for. And we had a team there in Brazil training the birds, and we went there and lived with the natives in the middle of the rainforest for almost 3 weeks, and it was absolutely incredible. Nobody gets to do that. And so here we are with, I don't know, 400 naked people and eagles and toucans and macaws and conures, and it was incredible. From there, we did another shoot in the redwoods, but it really taught me that in the most stressful of times, and where you don't even know, what you're going to wake up to next, you can find some of the neatest people and learn so much about yourself through these people and what they can teach you. And I swear they and the birds have changed me from that point on irreparably. Like I'll never be the same person having lived on a houseboat with 19 birds or in a thatch hut for 3 weeks and feeling like I was going to die. So that was how ABI got started. And it was shortly thereafter that things kind of started to deteriorate with my business partner. I also found out that my dad, who totally believed in my mission and actually, helped me get started, charged me interest, but helped me get started, and was just the hugest supporter of everything that I did, everything that all of his kids did. He got diagnosed with a rare form of cancer and given only a few months to live. And basically my world just kind of fell apart. So ABI changed quite a bit. I basically had to change my entire business model. But in that time, my dad passed away and I didn't want to get out of my bathrobe. So the neatest thing about that, once again, is that I had this sort of wealth of support from my volunteers, from my best friends, Catherine and Rich, and my partner, Andre, who you've met, whose dad was also really ill with terminal brain cancer. And he must have the most broad shoulders of any person I know, because I just leaned on him completely. And ABI, not because of me, but because of all these people, survived this crazy, horrific sort of nightmare. And all the people that helped us get through it and helped this change, because I had to change all the permits and I had to get, a new owl. And through getting the new owl, I met one of the most incredible groups of people who breeds owls, Pat and Lucas, and formed lifelong friendships. And then after that, I had to teach myself how to work a falcon. And through that, I learned even more things new about myself and help through others. So it was really one of the worst things that could have happened to me, but also one of the best, because I don't regret a single second of it, except my dad passing away. But it really makes you dig deep and find out who the really real people are in your life.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all of that. Can you explain to everyone listening a little bit about what it's now evolved into and the kinds of activities people can get involved in?
Absolutely. We always wanted to have a broad audience. We always wanted to do conservation in a different way. And we are still working towards some of our goals. In fact, this year is going to be exciting, but we are working on a bird show at the Henry Doorly Zoo in Omaha, and that is opening this summer. So we're pretty excited about that. We trained the birds and then are working with the trainers, and it's a really fun team, really, really good people over there. And in the meantime, we also have our own collection here on my 20-acre ranch where Andre and I live. And Andre has also helped collect the hoof stock that you probably have seen, the donkeys, the miniature donkeys and the goats. But we have a lot of fun training them too. But since we fly the birds every day anyways, we decided to go ahead and open up the ranch to allow people to come and experience these adventures so they can see what it's like to watch these birds literally just eat up the horizon. And it's pretty incredible to watch. Like, it never really gets old, ever. We just flew the macaws today, and I was just in heaven. And I was the same way yesterday when we flew the macaws. So I love sharing that with people. And I also enjoy the prospect of incorporating this with a little bit of the outreach we do. We don't do a whole bunch of outreach, but we like talking with the kids at some of these summer camps that we go to, and the libraries, and some of these events that we do around the community. So one of the goals that we have for this year is to open up the ranch a little bit more and create this space where conservation is an interactive activity. So I can't speak to all of the plans that we have because it's still in development, but we do hope to have different things going on in the ranch to have people interact with the birds even more and contribute to conservation directly. So we're really excited about that. We also have had workshops in the past. A lot of them have been based on companion parrot behavior. This year, we're actually planning to have a retreat that is a little bit more in depth, that might be attracting more professionals, because I've been getting just tons of emails from people that are interested in going a little bit further and a little bit deeper based on some of the training philosophies that I've been cultivating over the years that I believe in really, really passionately about. So those are some of the things that we hope to grow a little bit more, just coming from that place of service, coming from, we want to keep giving back. We want to keep building this grand pool of knowledge to share with people, because it's not just about us snuggling animals all day, and fun as that is, it doesn't get you very far. We really want people to learn and to share and to give on a much broader scale.
Well, the retreats sound absolutely intriguing. And I also read somewhere, or we talked about it in a previous conversation, there are opportunities that exist at ABI for internships as well. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have 2 interns come every quarter, and they can live on the ranch, and they are pretty involved in everything that we do. It's not just your typical, well, I don't want to say typical because internships are different everywhere, but they're very empowered. A lot of people have noticed that, and we've gotten a lot of feedback that we are very involved in allowing these interns to get a lot of training, a lot of experience, a lot of free flight experience in just their 3-month stay here. And not only that, but they also have 2 projects. And one is a training project where they can pretty much pick almost any bird and anything that they want to train that bird. They have to justify it. They have to come up with why it's important to train. and what the impact is, both for the bird and for the greater goals and missions of the company, but it's theirs to train. And then the second project is an organizational project, something that they can do to improve something about the company, something about the organization. And the reason why I do this is not because it makes me happy, and not because I want to get free labor, but because one of the things that I noticed about young people, and I don't think this is like a millennial thing or, just kids these days, but young people tend to think of me, myself. I want to grow me. I want to do this. I want to work this bird. I want to get experience with this particular animal. What's the bigger picture? What's the end game here? What's the great goal? And I realize that's hard to do when you're an intern who's spending 3 months working for free, so to speak, at a company that you may or may not have a future with. I have hired some of my interns, but you still are sort of on that limited time frame mindset. But what I want them to think of is how having the bigger picture in mind, that sort of meta view, actually can trickle down and make everyone's lives better, including yourself. And so it can work that when we all work together and all give forward, so to speak, that it pays off in dividends for everyone, including ourselves. So that's something that I feel really passionate about and tremendously thankful for our interns, is because they are giving 3 months of their lives and they are working really hard. And I do not take that lightly, and none of my staff does. And we are very thankful for what they do. So we really put a lot of effort, and we feel very honored for everyone that's come to our ranch to help out.
Those 3 months potentially are akin to your time spent on boats with birds and in the Amazon. They're potentially going to change people's lives.
Yeah.
And just before we move on to the next question, Hilary, just quickly let the listeners know where they can go to find out more about Avian Behavior International and potentially get in contact with you with regards to internships, etc.
Sure. We always post our internships on social media. They're always on Instagram and Facebook. You can also email me. I try and tell people when I post it, but it's just easiest to keep an eye out for them on social media.
Fantastic. And the website is
www.avian-behavior.org.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks for sharing that, Hilary. That was a lot of fun. For our next question, I wanted to ask you about people with companion parrots wanting to free fly their birds outside.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on this, and what kind of information does anyone wanting to do this need to know?
Yeah, I get asked about this a lot, as we were chatting about earlier, and I deserve it. I do feel that way because I do post a lot about my macaws flying and all my birds flying, but hopefully the context being that we are professionals. I started out as a companion bird flyer, and I make that abundantly clear, so I don't want to be a hypocrite. But I do try to make people well appraised of all the dangers, because I don't think people realize that it is an extraordinarily dangerous activity for the bird, obviously not for the human. The bird is going to pay the ultimate price for our lack of training, and sometimes it's just wrong place, wrong time, I mean, that's the way it is for birds in the wild. So it's not something that I encourage everyone to get out there and do. And if you do want to do it, there's two things. First of all, is that you should be really well rehearsed with your P's and Q's on operant conditioning, and this should not be the first thing that you learn how to train, because free flying is a systemic activity. So what you do in the home absolutely affects how well your bird comes back to you the next day when you're out there flying. So it's comprehensive. It affects everything that you do. How well your bird steps up, how well your bird flies back to you is not an isolated event. And the second is to have a mentor, an in-person mentor. That's how I got started. And that's why I feel like I'm not just a hypocrite. People out there who got lucky and have had success for a couple of years, but they haven't had their birds hit sexual maturity, which is a total game changer. Or they live in an area where there's not a lot of birds of prey. Again, a total game changer. And it's not just birds of prey. It's, all kinds of birds that can chase your bird off, which I have seen. So an in-person mentor can help you learn how to train so that you're not getting latent behavior and causing your bird to be even more exposed to risk than it already is. So those are my thoughts on that. I personally don't train people how to train their birds for free flight. It's not a risk that I want to take for other people's birds. I can't control everything in that scenario, and I would want to, and I just don't have the time. I'm sure it's a big moneymaker potentially, but it's not something that I want to put other people's birds at risk for.
And with regards to companion parrots, is free flying always a good choice for the individual bird anyway?
No, I definitely don't think that's the case. I've had a lot of people contact me that they want their 14-year-old bird that's always been clipped to free fly, and that's not something that bird needs. I personally wouldn't even take a formerly clipped bird out to fly. It's extremely dangerous for that bird. It's just asking for a bird of prey to come swoop it up, because it flies differently than a bird that's confident and has never been clipped. And it is a young bird that's prepared to make some mistakes and is still learning its wings and everything else as a young bird. So I would not ever recommend somebody just pull out a bird from a cage. And in fact, I even look at some of the young birds that we can select, and I can pick the ones that I believe are best suited for free flight, just based on some evaluation from my experience training. Off the top of my head, I couldn't even venture to guess, but dozens and dozens of parrots for free flight. So I just know which ones that I think would make the best and easiest candidates, and therefore the ones that reduce that risk.
So for someone sitting at home who's seen a video on social media of someone free flying their bird outside, these people need to address a couple of things. One, their own experience using positive reinforcement animal training. Two, the large amount of risks that are outside. And also, if you, for example, Hillary, are training a new bird up from scratch, let's say you're training a new macaw up, how much time does that take out of your day and /or from start to finish?
We clear out our whole day. So when we're training a bird and we're about to start flying it, we don't do anything for the rest of the day. We make sure that our schedule is cleared. We don't have to be anywhere, because that flight could take 15 minutes or it could take 6 hours. There's no telling. I can't predict it. I can have a good feeling when I know that bird is going to get excited and take off for a certain session, and I don't know where it's going to land, and we have teams of people spread out so that we can keep an eye on that bird, because that's the most important thing, is to always have eyes on that bird. And we know exactly how to call and when to call and who's going to do the calling, so that you can try and keep that bird looping close to you. But that doesn't always work, because you've got other birds that are like, ooh, what's that red thing doing? And it looks like a giant cheerleader. What am I going to do? And it's going to chase it, maybe off over the next ridge. And I've definitely risked, I don't want to be totally dramatic and say life and limb, but I've had to climb into some of my neighbors' yards where there's some unsavory looking guard dogs. And it's scary, I'm trying to knock on doors like, can I look for my giant macaw? And there's no one home but some shepherd looking dogs. And I've got to do everything I possibly can within my power to get my bird back. And, that's what it takes. But just because I can see the bird in the tree doesn't necessarily mean it's coming down to me when I call it, right? Because there's those 4 giant German shepherds barking at it, barking at me, and it's scared because it's just flown half a mile away and we're in a weird place. So yeah, it can take all day long. And sometimes you think you're to a certain level where, okay, the bird is popping out of a tree now, and now you're not. And it takes another 4 hours. So it's a nonlinear experience, and it does take a lot of time.
So there's quite a lot of ingredients in pulling this off and making it be a success. And for your average pet owner, the best place to start might be just to start to employ positive reinforcement and get some basic stuff in the house. But obviously to take your parrot outside, even if it's just on your balcony and sat on your shoulders, potentially all animals are individuals and some may not find it as pleasant, but logically it might be a nice experience for your bird. What are some alternatives to free flying your bird?
I'm a big proponent of aviaries. I passed around my aviary builder's phone number as many opportunities as I can get, because he does a really good job and he does everything he can to keep the costs down. So that's my big thing, is aviaries, and teaching people how to get their birds comfortable in aviaries. That's my big thing. You wouldn't think of buying a horse just because you have enough space for a 12 by 12 stall, right? So why not think of, I get a parrot, I better have enough room for an outdoor aviary. So that's my big thing, is trying to get these birds some outdoor time.
And just before we finish up on this topic, The other alternative that people reach for is harness training the birds.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience, inputs, and suggestions here?
Sure. I have harness trained a few birds, and I really feel that the most important thing to do is to make sure that you don't put the bird in a situation where it feels stuck in that harness, and then you have to really do a lot of negative interaction to get that harness off. So whether it's the brand of harness that you use or making sure that it's really loose and big before you start tightening it up. But I always make sure that rule number one, the bird is putting its head through on its own volition, so you can target that bird so that it's popping its head through the neck piece and then slowly getting used to the weight on its back and neck and then asking it to move its wings around. But everything should be done so that your goal in mind is to keep it from having that negative experience of feeling stuck in that harness. Because once you do that, then you've got to undo a lot of training or a lot of fear response. And everything that I do in my training is to avoid that fear response. So when I look for a harness, that's my goal, is to try and find a way that I can get the bird to put it on and start approximating putting it on without having it feel like it's going to get stuck.
Cool. And we briefly talked about before the recording started that Aviator is likely the most popular one on the market, but it doesn't have the clips that you're talking about. And the one you were thinking about was sort of marketed from the 80s.
Yeah.
Called Tether. Was that the name of it?
Yeah, I believe it's the feather tether. I should have looked it up, but it does have the clips. A lot of people find that the birds mess with the clips once it's on, but I've been able to simply train that away. I've done that even with my long-billed Corella and stuff like that. So, a bird that's notorious for finding shiny objects and really going to town on it. So I've had a lot of luck with that one. I've just had limited experience with the Aviator. I just haven't messed with it because I was mostly worried about the birds getting stuck in them. So it's not that I don't think it could work. I just haven't had to use it too much. I always want to give people as many options as they possibly can because they're going to do what they're going to do and they're going to want to take their birds outside with them. And I completely understand that. Who am I to say, don't take your birds outside? But understanding that it's not completely safe, and that's okay. And that is exactly what I have done. At the end of the day, you have to weigh safety with, I guess you could call it quality of life, that bird inside at all times and not have that activity be a shared activity of taking your bird outside with you or not. Your bird can get snatched off your shoulder by a hawk. It absolutely can. It's been done. So as long as people are aware of that as a potential risk and they can make that decision for themselves, they're taking the bird's decision out of it, just as I've taken the bird's decision out of my decision to free fly them and not keep them perfectly safe. But we sleep well at the end of the day by making sure that we limit the risk as much as possible. And that's where I was talking about know the habits of your area raptors. Understand the seasons, and that nesting season is going to be where they take the most risks because they've got to feed a family. If there's juveniles in the area, juvenile raptors are going to be hungrier and they're also going to take more risks than an adult bird. So all of those is just about knowing what you can live with if something happens to your bird.
Great information. And I know there's loads of people who listen to this show for whom this is going to be highly beneficial. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, Hilary. I was wondering now if we could please talk about something we haven't really talked about on the show much before. We have a lot of people listen to the podcast who might want to start something similar to ABI, but might understandably be a bit scared or hesitant to take the leap. Or people that do animal training as a side hustle and want to make it a bigger part of their life. Can you share some words of wisdom from your experience chasing your dream and touch on this really cool concept that you wrote a blog post about on your website, Ikigai, for us?
Sure. I really became familiar with the concept of Ikigai after two things. I read a book and I listened to a podcast about Ikigai, and it really sort of came full circle for me. So Ikigai is an Okinawan term, and it's sort of loosely translated as your reason for being. So what gets you up out of bed, basically. And I knew that when I first started on this journey of animal training and why I had to leave Wyoming and this life that I knew there and everything else, that where I was at the time, working for a zoo, that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And I had to do more because I knew I was capable of more and that I wasn't fulfilling everything that I could possibly do. And I think what really changed for me was when I wasn't wanting basically to get out of bed every morning, and I could barely even get out of my car to get to work. So the most important thing that I found, though, as I've been through this journey of my business and having to basically build it twice, is that business alone cannot be built on just passion. As a business owner, you have to be everything. You have to know about marketing. You have to know about managing people. You have to know about being a publicist. You have to know about social media. You have to know about the very industry in which you want to master. You can't just be an animal trainer, right? It sucks. Pardon my French, but it does, because at the end of the day, all I wanted to be was just a really good bird trainer, but that's not what I get to be. But it actually, if you can get over that, it's actually really okay because you're expanding yourself. So the concept of Ikigai for me is also, what are you willing to suffer for? And it wasn't just about me, suffering through this terrible year of having to figure out how to be a solo entrepreneur rather than a business partner, having to deal with the loss of my dad. I lost a close friend and sort of mentor all at the same time, who was sort of my touchstone with all of this business stuff, and it just sort of all went kerplunk. And so I know that all of this business stuff was about me really having to pull it together and continuously learn as much as I could about what it meant to be a business owner. That doesn't mean your bathrobe and drink wine when you really want to. So what it does mean is that you have to be willing to suffer day in and day out. And I know that sounds really bad, but actually it's not, because at the end of the day, where I'm at right now is that I don't care if I don't get days off, because I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I did have a day off. I know that that time will come when I can relax a little bit more and have a little bit more balance. But one of the things my dad told me that someone told him when he was building his business, that it took him 4 years before he could finally stand up out of a chair without gripping the handles. That basically it's supposed to be scary. It's supposed to make you worry every single day about the next day and 5 months from now. You're supposed to think about those things. I lay awake at night wondering and making sure that the plans that I make, the way that I schedule my day tomorrow, is going to be able to feed my employees a year from now. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So the other part of that, the really cool part about that, and this is what I would tell anyone that wants to do this as well, because I don't want to be scary and doom and gloom, is that you cannot be afraid to fail, because then it's not worth anything, right? Then you're not doing anything cool. You're doing the same thing. You're copying the same model that everyone else is doing. And that's why I say that I don't want to be just a bird show company, because there's probably a million. So I'm not afraid to fail, because then I wouldn't be putting myself out there and trying to do cool things, because you're always looking over your shoulder. You're always checking your step. You're always having one hand on the emergency brake and worrying about what everyone else is thinking of you. And I've got to say, I'm not. If I did, I would be doing things a whole lot differently. So that, I think, is what you have to be willing to suffer for. And that is what gets me up out of bed every single day, no matter what. And I've got the best partner, the most understanding partner who gets that, thank goodness, and a great team of friends and volunteers and staff and family that supports that vision completely. And that's balance to me. And the rest will come in time. And certainly it's something to work towards, but that's passion, is what are you willing to suffer for?
And at the end of the day, it's all for the birds.
Yep, exactly.
So cool and really inspirational. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about this. So
yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. We are sadly nearly at the end now, but that's okay, because we're heading into one of my favorite parts of the podcast show, and this is story time. Can you please share with everyone listening 2 or 3 more stories from your experience training animals so far and some of the important lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, for sure. One of my all-time favorite birds in the whole world is the falcon. And I just think it's the coolest bird, and I always have. And I finally decided to get one. And I didn't know how to fly a falcon very well, having tossed a lure around, but not very elegantly. So I decided to learn. And I have a volunteer that's a really good lure flyer. She's done it professionally for years at zoos and all sorts of facilities. But she only comes, once a week for 4 hours a day. So I talked to her and she was going to help, but I've got to get this falcon, and I want to be really good at it. So the other thing that I did was I just started searching on the internet. Like, what do people do? How do they learn? And it turns out most people, didn't have some mentor teaching them. They learned themselves, and there's a bazillion trillion different ways on how to lure fly a falcon. So I learned on some British falconry forum that you should get the Nick Fox videos, and he teaches you step by step. So between Caitlin, my volunteer, and the Nick Fox videos, I taught myself, and Caitlin taught me how to fly a falcon. And lo and behold, I get this stunning Saker falcon, and I trained her how to lure fly, and it was a team effort. We took her out into these plains north of here because my area is really hilly, and we've got 2 transmitters on this bird, but if she disappears over a ridge, it's really hard to track them. So we took them out to this flat spot, and I was terrified. I've never been so scared to free fly a bird in my life, ever. And it all went just fine. Like, it was like, that was it? Like, that was what we were all scared about? And we just kept on doing it. And my interns were all amazing, and they helped me, and they videotaped me, and Caitlin would come out and she would give us pointers. In fact, the first time that Haley, we named her after Haley's Comet, first time Haley went big, Caitlin was there and she was calling me directions, instructions, and I'm sure she was shouting them at the top of her lungs, but I couldn't even hear them. But it was truly a team effort, and it really goes to show that if there's ever something that you don't know, that shouldn't stop you ever. You have resources no matter what. And I thought that I didn't. I thought that I had to go and get somebody to help me, and it probably would have helped. But there are always people out there that want to help and that can help. And I'm not a big proponent of, learning some of these harder things from YouTube or virtual teaching and stuff like that. But I know my skill level, and I know what I can handle. And I had the mentorship, and I had, so many different things. And it didn't stand in my way to teach myself and have that real-time feedback as well. And it was just a really empowering experience because, like I said, I did lose an important mentor. I lost, all these things that could have helped me in my bird training and in my business. And they're not there, but sometimes they're inside you, even when you think that they're not.
Beautiful and great story. And Haley sounds fantastic.
Yeah, she's cool.
You're a good storyteller because I'm visualizing quite strongly. You're not saying that it accurately depicts in any way, shape, or form what it actually looked like on the day, but
yeah. Well, terror is a good look on me, I guess, because my eyes were just like the emoji. I was just terrified the first 5 times we flew her. So, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh, great story. Sadly, now that does bring us to our final question for this episode. Could you please take us all into the future now and share with us what you would like to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years in the animal training world?
Sure. There's 2 things, really. One of the things that I feel really strongly about is the way that people consume our education, basically. And I feel like a lot of bird shows are really fast, and they're kind of like TV. And some of my most favorite bird shows, and I think the people who know me are probably really sick of hearing this story, but my favorite bird shows are the ones with fewer birds and are longer. And I went to Scotland with my family, and we went to a castle. And there was this amazing falconer, I think his name was Andy West, and he had 3 birds and he gave a 50-minute bird show. And it was the best bird show I had ever seen. And I learned more than any bird show, probably more than 5 bird shows combined. He was so good and he was so funny, and he delivered. I mean, I was typing, facts as fast as I could write them in my iPhone, and he was just really, really good. And it stuck with me these years afterwards, 5, 10, I can't even remember how long afterwards. But I thought, if one man can deliver a 50-minute bird show like that, then there's so much opportunity for us. And I feel like we're trying to throw all these cool birds in front of people as fast as we can. And I remember people coming up to me at some of these enormous bird shows that I've given and ask, like, what was that bird that flew down? And what was that bird? And what was that one? And the education message was completely lost because we're so busy trying to throw really radical birds in front of them. And I feel like we're missing a very, very important, tremendously valuable message there. I think Mark does an incredible job up there at O'Reilly's Rainforest Retreat. He gives a great bird show. Doesn't have to throw a bunch of birds in your face. And with that in mind, the other thing that I remember about those shows, I was remembering like Andy's birds. Those birds were stuffed to the gills, crops like you would not believe. And that's the other thing that I felt really strongly about from the very beginning, before I even knew it was a thing, is that my birds aren't hungry. They're not feeling anguish about food. And that's something that I want a calm dialogue about, because I realize when we start talking about food and we start talking about weight management, people understandably feel threatened. And I hope that we don't have to be, that we can learn about how to train birds without using these huge weight swings and not making it to the point where the delivery of food stops becoming positive reinforcement and starts to become negative reinforcement, because that animal isn't coming to you to get something it wants. It's coming to you to relieve a pain that it has because it's so hungry. And I've seen that. And I hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, we talk about this more and we talk about it calmly, and we are coming from a place of curiosity rather than rigidity, and that we want to learn more about it rather than be stuck in our ways because it's scary.
Such a great vision, and I hope I'm there for those conversations. We, of course, are working really hard to hopefully make these things transpire as we move forward over the coming years. As mentioned, that does sadly bring us to the end. But before we wrap up, from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, a universe full of Animal Training Academy gratitude to you for making time to come on the show today. Thank you very much, Hilary.
Thanks, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. The pleasure is all ours. We do, of course, really appreciate all of you out there as well tuning in today. And as mentioned at the start of the podcast, I would like to ask a small favor of those listening. If you do enjoy this show, and as a practitioner of best practice behavior management, positive reinforcement yourself, you feel that the information held within could help others, then please share this episode wherever you can, on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, Snapchat, whatever you use, so that as a community we can do absolutely everything within our power to disseminate this information as far and as wide as possible. And one really easy way to do this, if you're listening to it from a podcast app on your mobile device or smartphone, is there should be 3 little dots next to the title of the episode, and this might change slightly between devices depending upon what app or device you're using. But if you click on there will be an option to share the episode, and you can choose Facebook or email or however you want to share it, and it's done. Really simple. Take your 30 seconds. If you could do that, that would be super. That's it though for this episode. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening. We're out the door, dinosaur. You'll hear from us again soon.